What's going on, everybody? Louie T here, and it's Tuesday. You know what that means. We are back with another crypto market update. Before we get started, hit that like button, subscribe, turn on post notifications, check out the links down below. BB Terminal, BB Discord, tons and tons of analysts giving day after day insights to what they're seeing in the market, way more in depth than what you're getting for free on YouTube. Check out those links below. And let's dive into it, guys. 2 weeks ago, I did a video expressing caution in the market. Why? Because Bitcoin on the weekly time frame had broken down, had given a weekly confirmation bearish market structure break to the downside. Once we got that confirmation on that weekly candle, I was expressing caution, right? Expressing caution in the markets, which was warranted. Since that video, Bitcoin has dropped another 15 to 17% to the downside. All coins have continued to slide. So that video pretty much timing well, right? Well timing. I was a little bit late to the party to flip bearish because I was waiting for weekly confirmation. And when you're a long-term high time frame swing trader, you kind of have to give yourself wiggle room in these markets, right? Because that wiggle room allowed me to stay in the game during this drop, during this drop, during this drop, during this drop. So, my style is giving myself a little more wiggle room, using the weekly high time frame to kind of assess the trend. Are we heading higher? Are we in a high time frame uptrend? Are we breaking that trend? And yeah, so since then, guys, we've seen continuation to the downside in the crypto market. We're starting to see some glimmers of a bounce here, and we're going to talk about that. Like, when are we going to see a bottom, right? When bottom? It's probably the question you're asking, right? Or when bounce? So let's dive into it, guys. This is a super simple weekly chart here for Bitcoin. I like to keep things super simple on the higher time frame. So Bitcoin has dropped 36% off the highs. So pretty much the largest pullback we've had since the run off the lows for Bitcoin. The question is this a cycle-ending pullback? Are we going into a bear market? If we're basing it off the 4-year cycle, which says, every 4 years, Bitcoin makes a low, then makes a high in just around 1,060, 1,070 days. We've seen that the last 2 cycles. Believe it or not, this high was exactly pinned to that 4-year cycle, almost to the day. This is something I've talked about in the past on this channel as well. The only reason why I wasn't really set on following that was because, yes, Bitcoin had its normal 4-year cycle, but what we didn't see was ETH and altcoins have their time to run in this cycle, where normally we do, right? Normally, ETH and altcoins run alongside Bitcoin, more so harder towards the end of the rally. We never got that part of the show here. So when the 4-year cycle came around, I was like, yep, we're around the 4-year cycle. However, things can be changing, right? We could be shifting away from that, and we eventually will, right? It's very hard to believe that these 4-year cycles will be continued to a T every 4 years, especially with all the institutional interest and the regulation that is benefiting the space. But yeah, we did hit the Bitcoin top, or at least the local top, at that 4-year cycle range timeline. And now we are trading into some market structure here, guys. So just looking at Bitcoin on the higher time frame, I really only have 2 areas of interest as far as downside. Where we are now, right? Kind of where we're bouncing off of now on the lower time frames. Weekly time frame doesn't look like much. Lower time frames, definitely a bit of a bounce. The question is, do I think this little bit of market structure here is enough to be a bottom from this 36% sell-off? My gut tells me no. right? My gut tells me no. Why? Well, again, going back to this, right? Significant weekly market structure break. We have a high time frame trend line. I'm not a big fan, right, of using these, ascending trend lines, right? I'm much more of a horizontal guy, but a significant break of trend here on the weekly time frame. Does that end here? I don't think so, right? So yes, we are technically in an area where we can expect a bounce out of Bitcoin, even ETH and altcoins. But ultimately, is that a bounce that bottoms us, or is that a bounce that rolls back over and comes into our next area of interest, which is pretty much 60 to 75K, right? I do believe that somewhere in this area, under this market structure and somewhere in this area, we will find a bottom for Bitcoin. And we should kind of hope for that, right? Because in my opinion, if we do trade down into this area and we start trading below our previous cycle highs, which is from 2021, Bitcoin's in big trouble, right? Bitcoin's going to be in big trouble for the long term, and probably be entering some sort of multi-year kind of bear market like we're normally seeing, right? So what would I like to happen, right? What would I like to happen? Not that the market cares. I would much rather prefer the market to, yeah, we're seeing a little bit of bounce. We're not going to go down in a straight line, but I think it would be much better off at this point if we continue a sell-off after this small little bounce, rip the Band-Aid off, come to where we're likely inevitably coming anyways and get it over with, right? Because what can happen is this. We are now coming into levels where on the weekly time frame, on our weekly RSI, we have seen bounces. So like right now, the weekly RSI on Bitcoin coming into levels that we saw a bounce coming into the 2022 bear market, right? So Bitcoin, big sell-off. We get a nice bounce. This takes multiple months. We made a bottom at the end of January. This bounce finished early April. So just about 2 to 3 months worth of bounce. And ultimately what happened? A larger capitulation and drop into the bear market lows. And all this shoulder did, and all this complacency bounce did, was just add time to getting to our destination of the lows. And that's what makes these kind of bear markets take so long, right? Instead of dropping, little bounce, completing it, we have these multi-month bounces in between these shoulders, and all that does is add time, right? So in an ideal world, I know a lot of you are probably still holding crypto. I myself still have crypto exposure. I'm not fully exposed at this point. I de-risked a little bit on this market structure break. Is rip the Band-Aid off. We're most likely coming into this area unless Bitcoin has a miraculous save here, reclaims 100, 105K, and can get on its horse and get going, right? I've seen Bitcoin in the 8 years I've been tracking the price action of Bitcoin fake out several market participants with these deep pullbacks, V-shape recover, and get going back to the upside, and shake a lot of people out. It's just not very likely, right? It's just not very likely at this point. 60 to 75K makes sense. It really just depends on, do we get a bounce up into the underside of 100K, 95, 100K, and then roll? Sure, a nice little bounce for relief would be great, but ultimately you're just adding time to where someone like me, I'm looking to buy the dip, right? I'm looking to buy altcoins and get positioned. And I'm looking to do that once Bitcoin kind of enters this area, or Bitcoin rallies, regains market structure, reclaims this area, and gets going. So I have to do business in here or in here, but in the middle, it's not the greatest idea to be doing business, at least how I do things, right? And what has me concerned, right? Because obviously we've had a big pullback, 36% for Bitcoin, it is a pretty decent pullback, biggest we've seen thus far in the last 3 years, is the equity markets, guys. the equity markets are kind of have me leaning a little skeptical. And that is because, the trend is starting to kind of flatten out a bit, right? So we've had a monster rally off our April and March lows, pretty much up and to the right with little to no significant pullback. But what are you noticing about this chart? That we're really starting to round out here, right? The curve is unsteepening. We're going from making higher low, higher high, higher low, higher high to start. We're starting to flatten out here, right? And this is kind of a sign of exhaustion, I would say, or a stall. It could just be a pause, right? But equities looking a little overbought, complacent investors and traders in the equity market, always kind of used to, a little dip and then continue higher. It's been doing that nonstop for 3 straight years. So I am a little cautious, right? Equities are keeping me cautious. And how am I kind of playing that? Well, I am looking at this level, right? We have this kind of market structure level here to the left, sits around 750 on the S&P. I would say above it, cautiously optimistic, right? Does it stick the landing? Can we reclaim this and go? Below it, right? Get back below this level. This looks like a nasty bull trap. You get back underside this level. I think there's a big drop coming for the equity markets, right? So right now, I'm not totally bearish. I'm more like neutral. I am surprised they walked this back up above the significant level. I didn't think they were going to be able to do that. This did happen during a low volume holiday week. So I am looking at this as a potential maybe trap of some sort. So I am going to give it to around the end of the week, right? End of the week, maybe early next week. If the S&P can stick the landing up here, continue to the upside, I think it's very likely that Bitcoin and altcoins can sustain a bounce from these levels locally, right? But if this does deviate, get back inside, and this is a bear trap. A bull trap. I'm sorry. Bitcoin and altcoins are not done yet to the downside, right? Now, with that said, I still think that Bitcoin and altcoins are closer to a bottom than most think. You saw the levels on Bitcoin, but I want to point to a specific example, which is the most recent example in a pullback in the equity markets, which is back in February of 2025. And we're going to throw Bitcoin down below. We've historically seen Bitcoin front run the highs of equities, right? What do I mean by that? Well, Bitcoin back in January of 2025 pretty much made its peak first couple weeks of January and began its sell-off down to the lows, right? Equities during the first kind of half of this drawdown for Bitcoin remained chopping, ranging, and distributing for 2 or 3 more months before finally topping and dropping around the end of February, early March, right? So Bitcoin gave the signal that, hey, markets are pulling back, right? And started a nice downtrend. Equities were late to the party, but Bitcoin kind of gave that leading indicator. I think that's what we're seeing now as well, right? I think that's what we're seeing now as well. So equity, Bitcoin obviously been pulling back for multiple weeks now, if not multiple months. But yet equities remaining elevated, kind of just chopping around here. I still expect to see that catch up to the downside out of equities. I do, unless they remain stubborn, they remain high for more than a couple months, and Bitcoin and crypto somehow rally out of this and are bottomed, right? But what I will say, and why, although I'm expecting sell-off in equities and maybe another drop for Bitcoin and altcoins, I don't think it's going to be as bad as people think, right? Because if we look at this example, once we saw equities really start to puke, right? So we had a sell-off, we bounced, and then the big meat of the downside move for equities, where something like the S&P dropping 16%, 17% in just a month or so, that's a significant move to the downside. Bitcoin had already been selling off and had already put in the meat of the move. So by the time equities decided to make its move to the downside, the biggest part of the meat of the move, Bitcoin only made a fresh lower low, only 3 or 4% lower than where it was before that move happened on the S&P, right? So a lot of people are going to be out there saying, oh, if equity starts selling off, they're going to be extremely, extremely cautious and bearish on Bitcoin and altcoins. I would argue and say, yes, it's right to be cautious, but once you start seeing equities finally catching up to Bitcoin and the crypto market, the bottom for crypto and Bitcoin is closer than you may think, because the same way that Bitcoin front runs the tops and starts moving first, in the same way front runs the bottoms and starts heading back to the upside, right? So it kind of works both ways. So yes, equity market kind of has me still cautious, even though we've seen a large pullback, right? Again, if equities can remain stubborn up here, continue to make fresh highs and chop around here with where Bitcoin and altcoins are at on the charts, technically, yeah, I think we could see bounces across the board and stuff like that. But is it a bounce that's going to sustain, or is it a lower high bounce that ends up rolling over and entering us into a bear market? So time will tell. I'll continue to track this stuff with you guys. But right now, still remaining cautious, waiting to see how equities kind of hold up. And until then, kind of sitting back and just keeping my eyes on equities. And that's really much it, guys. Other than that, we have a list of altcoins that I will be buying when the time is right. I give those to the Discord members. If you want access to stuff like that, check out the links below. Get in there. We do have Black Friday sales going on as well. Check that out. But until then, I'll see you guys next week. Take care. Peace.